Hey squad, what's going on? It's Rich Ryan here. Today we're talking about 3 lifts that will help you improve your sled pull for Hyrox. Now with the sled pull, there's a conditioning piece that is going to be probably even bigger than the strength itself. So this video is going to act like you have your conditioning taken care of with your general endurance work. So before we get into it, hit me with a subscribe if you want to get all of this style of content directly to your feed. We're talking about Hyrox, DecaFit, all hybrid training. Share this with a friend if they have a hard time with the sled pull. Let's go ahead and get into it. So the first lift that I found very effective for the sled pull is called a rack pull. Essentially what a rack pull is a deadlift from your knees to your hips. So you're skipping the first pull of a deadlift completely. So you're elevating the bar off of the ground to your knees and then lifting from there. So when it comes to the sled pull for Hyrox, the main way that you're going to generate power is through the opening of your hips. You start kind of bent over, leaning toward getting the rope, and the opening of the hips is what generates that power to start your reverse walk. And the best way to get the most out of your sled pull in competition is to maximize the amount of space within that box, so you can cover each step. So you can walk all the way to the back of the box and then walk all the way forward. Where people have a hard time is they're not able to generate enough power in that first pull to continue to get momentum to walk it back. And then they kind of walk only about half of the box and then restart over, and they're barely moving the sled at all. And then they get frustrated. And then there's a lot more reps that you have to do as well if you're not maximizing that box. So the first thing we want to focus on is that opening of the hips to generate that power to get that sled moving before we even start walking it backwards. So traditionally, a deadlift would work for building a stronger sled pull in terms of opening that hips. Why I like the rack pull is because it eliminates that initial pull. So that initial pull is a drive down through the ground in a standard deadlift, and it creates vertical forces until you get to about your knees, and then you open up your hips. In the sled pull for Hyrox, you can't get that type of power from the ground. The sled is way out in front of you, so it's more of a horizontal force, and when you start pulling, you're basically resisting the pull back from the weight of the sled. So driving your feet into the ground is more of a way to stabilize you so that it doesn't pull you forward. So it's less of a strength issue with being pulled forward, more of like a grip issue. There might be a little bit of a stability issue when driving into the ground, but mostly to move that sled, you need to open those hips. So taking away that first pull in a deadlift will eliminate the vertical forces, which we don't have in the Hyrox event. So starting the deadlift at your knees is going to give you only that opening position. Plus, many of us will be limited on how much we could do in a deadlift because of that first pull. Getting it off of the ground can be really challenging. I found especially for athletes who are coming from more of an endurance background, that initial pull from the ground is the hardest. So pulling from the knees, you can actually do a little bit more weight and more volume because it's not as taxing on your nervous system. So getting that bar to your knees from the rack or the pins and then opening your hips is a great way to really get specifically dialed in with what you're going to need in terms of strength for the sled pull. The second movement is pretty self-explanatory. This is a sled drag. So when you're dragging the sled, it's that walking backwards. And this is really going to put a lot of emphasis on your quads and your knees. So once you open up those hips using that posterior, then everything turns into a backwards walk. Again, to maximize that box. So loading up a sled drag as heavy as possible is going to be really helpful for that reverse marching that you'll need to do. So I'd recommend overloading the weight and also making the rope much shorter than what you need so you can make it much heavier. The length of the rope is also a pretty challenging part of Hyrox. So I would practice that in particular with your Hyrox specific workouts. But when you're doing sled drags, I would do something like TRX handles or just a much shorter rope so you're able to improve the amount of weight that you're going to do so you can be a little bit stronger in that reverse walk. The final lift or movement I would suggest for improving your sled pull is some kind of rope climb, rope pull-up, towel pull-up, or hand-over-hand sled drag. This is to improve your grip and forearm ability. So there is a limiting factor in terms of the grip when it comes to the sled pull. Oftentimes, if that rope starts slipping out of your hands, you're not going to be able to get that pull that you want, and you're not going to be able to again maximize that box because you're going to be hunched forward as you're trying to hold on to that rope. So shoring up your grip is a really important piece of this. Many of us will overlook this and think that is more just a brute strength piece. But if your grip starts limiting you, it's going to be very hard to maximize this pull. So I would suggest something like a legless rope climb, towel pull up, or a hand over hand sled pull. And I think the legless rope climb and the sled pull are going to be the most effective because as you're releasing your hand and moving it either up the rope or horizontally on the rope, you're putting all of the pressure on one hand to do that pull. So doing some sort of legless rope climb puts all that pressure on both arms at some point when they are the only arm there. So it's going to be way more intense on your grip and in exactly that position that you want it to be. So working that vertical grip position is very important when it comes to your sled pull. Okay, those are my 3 lifts that I would recommend for improving your sled pull. My recommendation for the rack pulls is to do 3 to 5 sets at 3 to 5 reps. So really working at that high end strength and power development rep range. For the sled drag, you can use a variety. You could do longer bouts or shorter, heavier bouts, or mixing them up. There's not a particular way that I think would be advantageous for this. I think both would work with that maximum power output and also the strength endurance. When it comes to the legless rope climbs, that is a pretty demanding movement. So I would recommend doing 3 to 4 by 2 to 3 reps. And when it comes to the hand over hand sled drag, probably something pretty similar. You're gonna have to feel out that weight. You want it to be something heavy, but that you can move, and probably doing 2 or 3 sets of that with heavier weight. There you go. Let me know what you think of these movements. If there's anything that worked for you, drop that note in the comments. Let the people know how to improve their sled pull as well. If this is information that you enjoy, hit me with a subscribe, hit me with a like, share this with a friend, and I will catch you next time.